Hello and welcome to The Signal, WorkplaceNL's health and safety podcast. WorkplaceNL is the Workers' Compensation Board in Newfoundland and Labrador, Canada. The focus is to promote safe and healthy workplaces, provide return-to-work programs, and offer compensation to injured workers and their dependents. This series of podcasts will provide you with the latest information on how workplaces can protect the health and safety of workers. Please enjoy the show.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our podcast. The title of our podcast today is Frank Ryan, The Journey from Workplace Injury to Success. My name is Jo-Ann Woodland, OHS Educational Consultant, and I work in the Prevention Services Department here at WorkplaceNL. And today I'm joined by my coworker, Kayte Parnell, who is a case manager in the Claims Services Department. And I'm also joined by Frank Ryan, who is a former injured worker, to talk a bit about his journey from the time that he was injured and, his journey through his claim and where he is today. Okay, I think it's important, so that we get the context of Frank's story, that we go right back to hearing about your background, Frank. So can you tell me a little bit about yourself, like where and how you grew up and what was school like for you, and bring me up to when you started in the workforce.
So my story begins with my dad, who died 6 months before I was born. He was playing hockey one night and had a heart attack, and my mother was left as a single parent, basically raising me. At around 6 or 7, I was in school and I was told I had a learning disability. This made me feel like there was something wrong with me, and for years it affected me. I would go to different classes during French, and I always felt like I was left out or I was different than all the other children. That had a really big impact on my whole life, basically. School went ahead. I always got barely passing grades. Math I was good at, but English not so much. And in grade 9, I just kind of gave up on myself. Felt like I was unintelligent and figured I was not capable. So I failed grade 9, and then I switched schools to go to another school where I had a few friends and felt this could be a fresh start. So I did switch, and it was different, but it was still the same problems. The guidance counselor during that time was really good, and she wanted to figure out what was going on. So she put me through multiple tests and finally came to the conclusion that I had an eye tracking issue. What she explained to me was that one eye would skip ahead to the next word, and then one would stay on the current word, and I'd be reading both at the same time, so it made it very challenging for me to read. In high school, I would go to special education classes, and while they would help in some sense, it didn't really make a big impact, and I would eventually just go off and I'd make it to grade 12. We also had a friend who died during that year, so it made it hard on all the students, and I just failed out again. I decided working was better for me, and that's where I wanted to go.
So it sounds like you struggled a lot going up through school.
I did, yeah. I always felt like an outcast, and that was the hardest thing, too. All you want to do is fit in most cases, and I always felt like I didn't.
Right. So did you finish high school?
No, not at that point.
So without a high school diploma, where do you go from there?
I just always swore I didn't need that piece of paper. I just thought to myself, I'll make it no matter what. I started off at Wendy's for a bit of time, and then I worked at Tim Hortons after that. But I always worked my way up. So at Tim Hortons, I started off as a cashier, worked my way up to baker. So I always had an ability to want more. So right. I always was a hard worker. Then eventually I worked at a call center. And then after that I went into construction. In Alberta for a short period. I then came home and I found myself going into flooring installing and found my way into that world and basically started out as a helper and worked my way up into a flooring installer.
So what year was that? What was the time frame around when you started working in construction?
I'd say 2008, 2010, somewhere around there.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the injury would happen in 2019, November.
What happened on the day of your injury?
So basically it was a rainy day. I remember we were working at a house out in CBS. We were told to go there, so we showed up for 9 o'clock in the morning. I had to do a small porch with vinyl tile. I remember walking in and the house there was just white coating and dust. I think if I had to guess, it was plaster dust.
Okay.
And it was just coating the floor. So we swept up our area, and the biggest concern with that at the time was that it you breathe it in, because it was always, as you're sweeping, the dust comes up, and that was a big problem.
You would think that was your biggest hazard.
You would think, yes. It didn't turn out that day. It turned out to be a lot worse. So basically, with the rain on the bottom of my shoes, plus the plaster dust on my feet, after 3 hours of doing the porch, we walked out, and I was putting stuff away in my car. And I had my tool bag, or a few tools, plus the heavy tiles in my hand. And when I went out to the first step, I remember putting my foot down, and my foot just went out from underneath me. I guess there was a slime on my foot from the mixture of plaster dust and the rain. And the next thing I knew, I was on 3 steps, one going across the top of my back, one going across the middle of my back, and one going across the bottom of my back. And I remember there was the people that were doing the construction came over and rushed to me and helped me up, and a helper of mine also rushed to my assistance.
So what was going through your head at that point?
I didn't know what to think. It was just happening so fast. It was just, and the tools that I had landed on top of my chest, so that added insult to injury, I guess.
So what happened after that? You got injured that day. Take me through the next few days.
Oh, the next day, so I called my employer, and they felt that a day off was needed, so they gave me an unpaid day off, just to recuperate. On the next day after that, I came back to work, and I remember trying to lift things, and it just felt different. I just couldn't lift anything anymore, the things that I would. In our job, we had to lift furniture daily, all these kind of things, and I remember trying to lift something and just not being able to do it. So I remember letting my employer know at that point that there was something wrong, and that I was going to go book a doctor's appointment. I contacted my employer and let them know there was something wrong, and they informed me that because I never filled out the form on the first day, they would not be able to, workers' comp would not fulfill the claim.
I've worked in claims for a number of years myself, and you're not the first person that I've heard say that, so that seems to be like a common kind of misconception out there. Kayte, maybe you could shed some light on that.
Yeah, the big thing is that yes, reporting it early is best. So yes, on the day of is always a wonderful thing. It does not have to be the first day. I think it's just a misinformation more than anything, that people believe that it has to be done immediately or it doesn't count. If it was a workplace injury, it was a workplace injury.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Like what you just said there was, if it's a workplace incident, it is what it is. So report it, the earlier the better. If it happened at work, then report it. Get the forms, see your doctor.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can you tell me a little bit about how things changed for you after the injury and the impact it had on your life?
Yeah, so basically my doctor, once I went to him, he informed me that I could still get workers' comp, so he filled out the forms that needed to be done, and he put me on modified duties with a light weight load, basically, when I was at work. So he told me to go back to work, but I could still do only smaller amounts of work, basically.
Okay.
So the next part of that would be basically that I would do some work and go back, and the pain was there most days, but I tried to struggle through whatever I could. It would get worse as time went on, and it just became worse and worse. My doctor would eventually tell me I needed physiotherapy, which is what happened at that time. And basically, yeah, so I went through that, and some of that was excruciating because it helped, but it also caused more pain through that. So I also tried massage at their recommendation. Up until that point, basically, COVID actually happened shortly after, and then my employer could not keep me on because he didn't have the supports to help me with working, basically. Yeah. He was working by himself. Basically, he couldn't have someone to help me when I needed extra help.
Yeah, because you had some restrictions. And
I did, yes.
So what did you do then?
Basically, I stayed at home. I felt less pain because I wasn't doing the bending, the stretching, the lifting that I was doing at work. But there were still times I had pain and stuff like that. So then I was assigned an occupational therapist, and basically he devised a return to work plan, and that was implemented when I was going back after COVID. He basically set out what days I would work, how much work I would do, what was the limits, all that, and that was put in place. When we went back to work, everything was fine at first, but there was some issues where I was left on jobs where I had to lift more than I should have, and I was also being told to work longer. So that kind of made things even worse, and that created more problems.
It can be challenging when there's modifications and restrictions. You wanted to do the job and do it effectively, but your body wasn't really equipped to perform in that way. Yeah. So I guess, were things getting worse physically for you now?
Yeah.
Or?
Yeah, I guess into the time off during COVID, I guess my body wasn't used to all that spending and stretching, so when I went back, it became even worse on my back. And then around that time, too, my doctor didn't want me to stay on the medication for too long, so he decided that because I could have kidney problems, he wanted that medication to stop, and he put me on a new one. I remember being at a job one day, and I was on the new medication probably about a week, and all of a sudden I was dizzy. I couldn't stand up. So I had to leave the job at that point. And I remember going home. It really affected me. I called my doctor and he said, I'm taking you off all medication altogether. And with that, my job became excruciating. So I just couldn't do the work anymore because I didn't have the medication to help with that.
So when you're going through all this, the physical, impact, you can't do your job like you want to. What happens mentally? Does this have an impact on your mental health?
Yeah, that was probably one of the worst moments of my life. I can remember just feeling down, not knowing what the future held. School was not even a viable option in my mind at that point because I never passed. So to think that would be my future was just impossible. I just thought my life was over. I just felt like everything was going wrong. I had no control over anything, and everything was just coming at me all at once. The pain was even more adding to all that, and it was just a really hard time.
So as humans, we kind of bring in our coping mechanisms. Yeah. So what did you do to try to cope, and what happened?
So being off during COVID and all that, I started to eat more, and I would put on 40 pounds because I'm not moving as much in my physical job. When I did go back, again, still not moving as much and not able to do as much, so the weight just kind of added up. Shortly after that, with the medication, I couldn't do my job anymore, so my doctor took me off work altogether. I didn't know what was happening after that point, but I knew at that point I wasn't going back for a while. I talked to my occupational therapist, who at that time I felt was also a physiotherapist, so I asked him to be that. And I mentioned to him about going for a walk daily, and he thought it was a really good idea. I think it was July, and by August 10th, I decided I was going to start walking daily. So on August 8th, which was my birthday, I bought myself a Fitbit watch, and then by August 10th, I started walking daily. So I started with 40 minutes a day. The next week it was 45. The week after that it was 50, and I just worked my way up to about an hour and a half per day. And it had helped with my back because I guess the movement of my legs and all that, it just really worked. And I also, over a 11-month period, I lost 100 pounds.
I don't think you're the only one that put on a few pounds during COVID. It was definitely a challenge for a lot of people, but walking was definitely a good solution for you.
Yes.
Probably improved your mental health as well.
Did, yeah. Took me out of that dark place.
Yeah. So somewhere around that time, did you go through a rehabilitation program?
It was probably in the middle of my weight loss, so I was doing that as well as walking. It was called the Seaboard program, and it was 2-week periods, and I was supposed to do 3 2-week periods. The first one went okay, but I was having a lot of trouble in between. The weights that shouldn't be hard to lift were becoming harder to lift. The second session went okay, but again, the same issues. It was getting worse instead of getting better. I remember my physiotherapist saying to me, I don't know what's wrong. I can't figure it out. You should be better, and I don't know why this is. So we were supposed to do 3 sessions, but on the second session he canceled. He said, you're not getting any better, so we can't go forward. I remember having an earnest conversation with him and asking him what happens if this doesn't work. He said, basically, you're going to be put into a job like maybe a Walmart greeter or something like that, which there's nothing wrong with that job, but for me, being in construction, that was horrible. That was a horrible future.
You were focused on getting back to what you did.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So that felt like torture to me in that sense.
That must have been really hard for you to hear.
It was. I remember crying. I remember actually leaving that day and calling my employer and said, I don't think I'm coming back to work anymore. And I was just in tears on the phone.
You're throwing in the towel at that point.
I just didn't know where I was going. Yeah. I think at that point, the only thing I could control was my weight loss. So that's where I focused all my attention because everything else felt like it was crumbling around.
There's a lot of uncertainty in your life then.
Yes.
So did you think about the future and where you might go from there?
My case manager at the time mentioned that schooling might be an option. But I didn't believe it, I guess, until you actually hear it's going to happen. You just think, oh, maybe it's an empty promise. So he told me to think about those things. So I had an uncle. He recently died a couple of years before, and he was like a father to me. So he was an accountant. So I always wanted to be like him. Accounting was in the back of my mind, but I didn't really know if it was possible, if I was smart enough. There was many barriers to doing that.
We've kind of talked through how your claim progressed. At this point, from what I'm hearing, is the likelihood of Frank going back to the job that he did is not really very likely. Maybe, Kayte, from a case manager perspective, you could explain to us a little bit about the life cycle of a claim. Frank mentioned some terms in there about early and safe return to work and going back to school, which is labor market reentry. Tell us a little bit about, so that we got a general idea of how a claim, and again, I know they can be complex and every claim is different, but how should a claim generally flow?
Once the injury happens, everything's been reported, the claim is adjudicated. So basically it's the decision to say, yes, this was indeed a workplace injury, this is what we're dealing with. We typically talk about wages or wage loss at that point, depending on the employer. And usually we aim to start with conservative measures. So doing things like physiotherapy, occupational rehab, things like that are usually where you would start, because those are the things that have been found to help in most cases. It's not every case, as you said, every claim is a little bit different. Once those are going forward, the majority of people are in the position to return to work. So as you did, Frank, where you went back and you were on, as we sort of say, as a modified duty within an early and safe return to work, keeping you connected with your employer, so them being able to accommodate in a modified capacity, again, typically is what we're aiming for. There are employers out there, smaller employers, who may not be able to accommodate that. This is where we need to take a bit of a pause, right? And so sometimes, again, like you had done this CBOR program, so clinic-based occupational rehab is what that stands for. So you would be working with an occupational therapist in the clinic setting. So instead of being at work and doing sort of work-hardening things, you're in a clinic doing work-hardening things is typically how we would set that up. Sort of building your tolerances over time is usually how things are able to progress. In your particular case, that's not how it happened, and it isn't how it happens for everybody, but sort of, as we've seen, the vast majority of claims do benefit from that kind of thing. So that's kind of, like I say, a little bit more conservative when we start out doing the treatments.
It makes sense.
Yeah.
Try to get them better.
That's right.
First, to get back to your, the job that you did. And, we all know, and the statistics are there to support this, that being connected and remaining at the workplace in whatever capacity that could be is the best case scenario, not only for your physical health, but for your mental health as well. So, then you start to talk about this labor market reentry. Tell me what that looks like or what it is.
Yeah, so labor market reentry can kind of be done in a couple of different ways. One is where we sort of are trying to assist the employer to say, hey, potentially with a bigger employer, let's say, they may have any number of positions that you would be able to do, but they may not know that you'd be able to do them until it's sort of set up in this plan. So sometimes if we were working again with a larger employer, they might say, oh yeah, you could actually move into an alternate position within our organization. This is what you may need to do. Maybe there's a certification that you would need, or safety tickets, or different things like that you could move into those positions. So we would sort of start with a bit of a preliminary screen to determine what that looked like. Now, in Frank's case, that wasn't what we were looking at, because again, a bit of a smaller employer that he was working with, and also looking at their ability to accommodate was not necessarily what was going to fit within how we would look at that. Right. So when we start to have those conversations to say, going back into this particular employer at this time is not really what's best for you, because flooring installation is a physical job, right? So when we look at labor market reentry at that point, we typically have had a conversation with the employer to say, do you think that this is something that you're able to have happen for Frank at this point? Again, smaller employers typically aren't able to do that. So at that stage, things like psychometric testing, so they do IQ testing, which is how Frank determined that he was actually a very bright individual instead of, as he'd always been led to believe, not so bright. But they also look at things that would be reasonable. So we kind of look at it in a couple of different ways, in that they start with the idea that if we did nothing, if we only looked at what we would consider to be direct entry positions, this is where we would be. So sometimes it is positions like Frank had indicated, like a person working as a store greeter potentially, because if you don't have a level of education, you're not able to do physical work. Potentially there may be additional barriers. Those positions are things that you could go out and walk into without having to do anything else. Right. But when we're looking at things, basically it does say, everybody's sort of capable of doing something. So within his physical restrictions, within his educational abilities at that level, that is a position that exists in the world, it exists in Newfoundland, and that is something that they kind of would look at that way.
Right.
On the other side, we also look at, again, having done these psychometric testings where we test his IQ levels, it did come back that he was in a position where he could return and do some schooling. So when we have the ability to look at retraining options, that is the thing we have to ask is, they may want to do it, but are they capable of doing it? But they kind of go through and they determine, okay, looking at what he actually wants to do, what's reasonable. We also keep in mind, of course, because though we're here to assist the worker, the employer also is footing the bill for some of these things too.
Right.
So we don't necessarily just go, yes, okay, perfect, you get to go back to school for the next 20 years, we're going to cover all of those costs. That's not really how it looks, because we do have to keep claim costs in mind at the same time. So striking a balance, looking at potential...
There's a lot of factors involved in a worker's claim, and one takeaway I'm getting today from what you said, Frank, and from what Kayte is explaining is that, if you're getting information from different individuals that doesn't seem right to you, go to the case manager and ask the questions.
Yeah, the My WorkplaceNL as a website actually has tons and tons of information for employers, for workers, for everybody, really.
So now that we know a little bit about labor market reentry, Frank, why don't you tell me what that looked like for you?
So from what I remember when I started off, I was contacted by a company, but they basically said, we're going to get you to come in and do some testing. So I went into their office, and I was scared because every test I've taken in my past has been a fail, or it's been really bad. So I thought, okay, this is the same thing going to happen. And I remember doing the testing. It took about 4+ hours, I think. And he did an IQ test. I think he did a CAT exam or parts of it. Basically, when the results came back, my IQ was a lot higher and way more than I ever imagined. The math section of the CAT exam was, he told me he's never seen somebody get 100 in it, and I got 100 in that part. The other part of this was he had geometric shapes, and he said this question, he said nobody gets right. So he said, don't feel bad when you get it wrong.
Until now.
Yeah, and then I got it right, basically. So all of a sudden my mind went from feeling like I couldn't do anything or that I was unintelligent to, wow, I can actually do things and I'm smart. So it was a big change for me.
Awesome.
Yep.
Well, that had to be great to hear after everything you've been through.
It was.
Yeah.
So the next part, as I remember, I was talking to a girl named Heather at the time. He basically told me, we're going to try to get you back to school. But she said, I want you to go find information on different places to get your high school diploma and the needs to get into Kona. So I went in on search and basically found out all the information, brought it back to her, and she basically said, okay, well, she said, go apply to the Murphy Center. So that was the step I took, and then basically she did up a report after a few months, and then we had a meeting with my case manager, her, and myself. We found out what the best path forward was, and there was 3 multiple options that they gave me. One was going to, I think, dispatch would be the next job that I could do with just high school. Then there was 2 other options, and accounting was one of those options.
So where is your head now? What are you thinking? Going back to school?
Scared, but at the same time excited to see. I just didn't know. And even in that meeting, it was all still unbelievable because I just didn't know what was going to happen. I didn't know if my case manager was going to accept it.
So they accepted it, and you went back to school.
I did, yes.
At the Murphy Center.
The Murphy Center. And I remember walking into the doors and thinking to myself, what am I doing here? This is all so strange. But I knew I wasn't going to have the same results I had in the past. They had anticipated that would take 3.5 months, but I knew I needed to finish before that so I could start at Kona in September. So I decided I was going to try to finish things as fast as I could. So if I got through chapters fast, then I could do it faster. It was supposed, as I said, it was supposed to take 3.5 months. It took me 3 weeks. I ended up coming out of grade 12 math with a 98% average, and I ended up coming out of the English with a 100% average.
Meanwhile,
wow.
Is told his whole life that he can't do these things, and then instead of taking the regular amount of time, does something in 3 weeks.
Well, it just goes to show that when you have your mind made up to something, and the dedication and the support that you had, the proper support. I think as an adult and even as children, everybody doesn't learn the same way, but that doesn't mean that you're not smart and you're not capable. It's just a matter of figuring out what your strengths are and what the best ways for you to learn is. So you went back to school.
Yep. So basically, I ended up meeting great teachers. They were amazing. One of them has been like a mentor to me. His name is Jo-Ann Woodland, and he's been inspirational in my life. He got me to read a book for class, and I always told my teachers or whoever I was a non-reader. So I've never read a book in my life to this moment, and he got me to read one. So I read that one, and it was called Tuesday at Maury's, and it was a really good book. So then he started giving me more books and just showing me different things. So I read another one, and then I started reading business books, and then I started reading more and more. And to this date now, I've read 30 books in the past 2 years. So it's been a big change.
Can't stop you now.
No, exactly.
You're walking, you're reading.
Yeah. Life has changed. There's no doubt.
Life has changed.
Yeah.
So what program did you do at the college? You went to the College of the North Atlantic?
Yes, I did, yes.
Yeah. So what program did you do, and where's that taken you?
So business administration was the program I did. Yep. When I actually graduated from the Murphy Center, I actually got a scholarship for $500 at that point. So in September of 2022, I would attend College of the North Atlantic and do a business administration accounting program. In the first year, I would get a 4.0 GPA. I believe it was an 89 average I had in total. And I would get another scholarship, which was the Flight 491 Cougar Helicopter Memorial Fund. So I was on cloud 9 at that point and feeling like I could accomplish anything. And it was just a great feeling. I was still having some pains and different things like that, but my leg was starting to go numb, which was a side effect of my back injury. And that had happened previous at the Murphy Center, but it did show up from time to time while I was going to school. Once I had finished, well, actually, maybe before I finished, I had it set up with Eastern Health to get a work term, and I would work in their payroll department. That would be a 6-week work term in experience, and it was good to get back into the workforce for the first time.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah.
In a whole new capacity.
It was, yes.
Not laying flooring.
No, it was totally different, and it was definitely new and exciting, but scary at the same time. It's same as going into the Murphy Center was, I guess. So I ended up doing so well that they actually hired me back. Yeah. So I'm actually working there at this moment, and it's been a great journey.
So I think you've been into some other things lately as well. You actually wrote a book?
Yes. So after my first year at College of North Atlantic, I actually volunteered with the Learning Disability Association. I kind of was just searching one night on where I could volunteer because I knew I had the summer off and I wanted to do something with my time. So I looked through, and all of a sudden I came on one website, and here it said the Learning Disability Association was looking for volunteers. So I contacted them, and immediately they gave me tasks to do. So one of the things was creating a Excel spreadsheet of all the information of the different programs that each Learning Disability Association has all across Canada. So I think I did that within record time, too. They said, you're doing things too fast. But that was always my way, right? So I think in a couple of days I had this brought back to them. They were happy with that. So then they had me do the same thing, but for ADHD. As I was learning about business over this time and kind of finding my own path through books and things, I decided to take this seminar at the end of the summer. After the seminar, it was like a light went off in my head, and I was out for a walk the Monday after, And I had been doing slideshows for the Learning Disability Association, and I was like, what if I took that idea and made it into a book? And all of a sudden, the book came into my mind, and I ran with it. Again, like me, 2 weeks, I had a book printed, and shortly after I had it published. And yeah, it's self-published, obviously, but yes.
That's amazing.
And what's the book called?
It's called Why Am I Different? So it was meant to help children, and basically $5 from each sale went to the Learning Disability Association. To date, I've sold about 115 copies, and I've raised over $600 for the Learning Disability Association.
So what else are you going to do? Because I know you're not stopping there.
No, so since that happened, I've also hired a marketing company who are helping me out greatly. So we're in the process now of launching a new website, and also in the process of making another book. As I see more things coming in about how it's going to be completed, I'm more excited daily. So
awesome. So stay tuned.
Yes, stay tuned.
Frank and Kayte, I'd like to thank you both for joining me today and chatting with me. It's been great. Frank, your workplace injury experience and the journey that followed is certainly a very compelling and inspiring story. You know, although we've come a long way at reducing the number of workplace incidents in this province, we still have a lot of work to do because there's still 12 workplace injuries happening each day in our province. So my hope is that if somebody hears your experience today and the challenges that you experienced through that time, and they could get a bit of inspiration or a bit of hope, there's options, and with the right supports and programs, they can do it. And Kayte, I'd like to thank you for joining me and shedding some light on the case management perspective and the importance of reporting workplace injuries when they happen. Legislation actually states that a claim for compensation should be made within 3 months from the occurrence of injury. However, like we discussed, there are many different circumstances surrounding claims, and you should really report as soon as possible. And Frank, congratulations, and I can't wait to see what's coming up next for you, and I can't wait to share this podcast with everybody. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today. Transcripts are available to use in your workplace to increase workers' knowledge in various occupational health and safety topics. Visit WorkplaceNL.ca for more information on the services we provide to workplaces. Feel free to share the signal on social media to improve workplace health and safety everywhere. Thank you, and have a safe and healthy day.